Today, I want to explain why I think that the Princess and Princess quest is none other than Fiona Murray. So in this video, we're going to essentially offer you a good chunk of the evidence I found to support this idea. Some evidence stronger than other evidence that I have, of course. But before I go over any of that, to spare you any confusion, we first have to be clear that I may use Fiona and F10 interchangeably, and that's due to the fact that at this point in the story, I see Fiona and F10 as connected. What I mean by that is some sort of supernatural connection. See, the story of F10 first talking to Edwin in the basement of Murray's Manor, I see as a supernatural event. And without getting too lost in that discussion, my main arguments for this being supernatural are that, to my knowledge, Edwin did not program any of his creations with the goal of mimicking Fiona. While we do have evidence of his creations randomly spouting sensitive information, the mushroom dudes and whatnot, none of that should have led to F10's absolute heartbreaking obsession with recreating David, or saying lines like this.
Would you consider visiting every once in a while? I miss you, but I miss my child more.
These are emotional statements, and this is a powerful driving motive for F10 as a character. From the audio logs in Secret of the Mimic, we also know that Edwin was highly against rebuilding David. This was never something he wanted to do. And when the Mimic finally does imitate David, Edwin is furious and beats the crap out of the Mimic. For me, this information is not consistent with Edwin having ever been supportive of recreating David. But even if he had at some point caved in and tried to build David for F10, and tried to build David as F10 requested, it doesn't explain why F10 starts trying to contact Edwin after Fiona's death. How I see it, there's something more going on here. And since we're dealing with FNAF, which is full of possession, not to mention Scott's interview with Dawko where he spoke about how interested he is in the idea of possession in AI, to quote,
I always lean sci-fi. I have a tendency to lean sci-fi, even though I try to come back into the roots of the supernatural instead. But I can't help my inclinations to lean sci-fi. So anything that involves possession of AI or possession of machines or circuitry, I love that sort of thing.
I personally find this incredibly relevant for Fiona, because if this is in some way Fiona, it checks nearly all of those boxes that Scott mentioned. Possession of the AI Edwin created, the possession of the circuitry through M1 as an endoskeleton, and lastly, possession of a machine through F10 and 4, the machine that Fiona/M1 is ultimately stored in. This is all, of course, raw speculation, but worry not, we have plenty to talk about today besides this. This Mimic AI specifically has been shown to have a mind of its own, which could lead to a conflict of interests if Fiona and the Mimic program have varying goals. But on the contrary, there is some good evidence to counter all of this, and I have nothing against contrary perspectives on this matter. But for this particular theory, I just want to make it clear up front that I do think there's a supernatural connection between Fiona and F10, and I'll likely use their names somewhat interchangeably with the background knowledge that while a possession is taking place, I do think there may also be a conflict of interests between F10 and Fiona, and we'll go a bit more into that later on in this video. But let's get back to the princess though. What have we actually been shown about this character? What do we know about the princess? Well, the character was first introduced in the mobile version of Help Wanted. Princess Quest 1 could be unlocked in this mobile version of Help Wanted by focusing the camera on glitching objects that would randomly show up, and after doing this a few times, the player is rewarded with having Princess Quest playable in the mobile version of the game. Just the fact that the game is unlocked by focusing the camera on these glitching objects already screams Fiona to me, or at least the aspect of Fiona/F10 that's in Moon.exe, because the Sun character in this Moon.exe game from Secret of the Mimic is explicitly connected to glitches, literally granting Arnold in Secret of the Mimic the glitched permission we use in the secret ending to recreate David. But just in case you aren't familiar with the Sun character in Moon.exe, this Sun essentially is guiding our player towards recreating David throughout the Moon.exe game, and therefore points me back to my assumption that the Sun is indeed connected to F10. And if F10 is somehow possessed by Fiona, then I think it's fair to say that the Sun represents Fiona. So I guess for me, just the fact that in Help Wanted, in order to unlock the Princess Quest game at all, we have to literally focus the camera on glitches that appear. And with that information, my mind immediately returns to the Sun in Moon.exe that gives us our glitched permission. As far as Princess Quest, we are only able to play the first Princess Quest game in this Help Wanted, but by the time Security Breach was released, we also discover Princess Quest 2 and 3. And then in Help Wanted 2, we play a fourth Princess Quest game. So having 4 Princess Quest games in total thus far, and now that we've had Secret of the Mimic story presented to us, many theorists are piecing together the idea that the Murray family was, in a sense, first introduced to us through Help Wanted. Let me quote Tape Girl in Help Wanted before I explain further.
They sent us that stuff in the first place with no explanation, told us to scan it, said it would expedite the process so we wouldn't need to program any pathfinding ourselves. It was a budget thing, I guess. It was just junk. Circuit boards and things like that. Looked pretty old. Somehow, though, there was usable code on some of it. It seemed to take hold by itself. Things started changing.
Essentially, I believe, and I think a good chunk of others might as well, is the fact that this code, this junk, as Tape Girl calls it, that gets used and uploaded to create Help Wanted, is essentially part of the Mimic program that originates from Secret of the Mimic. And if something like that is the case, to me it makes sense then that this princess introduction in Help Wanted was actually our first introduction to Fiona herself. Again, whether or not M1/F10 and Fiona are the same is up for debate, but at this point I would argue that Fiona possesses the AI, but it doesn't necessarily mean that she is the AI itself. It's a similar concept in my mind to how the animatronics from other FNAF games have preset functions that they will perform, but the souls that are bonded to those animatronics are still very much possessing them and are separate from those performances. The other difference with this Fiona AI possession though is that the AI in Secret of the Mimic is able to adapt, and the way it's described in the books, it's not just mimicking what it sees and observes, but it's actually learning, very similarly to how actual people do in the real world. There's something more to this program. It's choosing to do certain things. Take M2 for example. M2 gets badly beaten by Edwin, and when the tables turn later on and Edwin ends up on the floor crying for help, M2 hits him with his own words that he'd used on David in the past, turning the scenario into a scene that, if it wasn't so morbid, would be borderline hilarious to me. But humor aside, there are so many examples of this kind of unique behavior, like how F10 tells us that the Mimic goes around deciding what costume it wants to put your character in. Or take F10, just the way that F10 leaves that message for Edwin at the end of the game, telling him essentially how she feels about everything, even pleading with him to just come visit once in a while. It's really sad stuff. These are things that were absolutely not part of its programming. Talking about how she misses Edwin and her son, F10's desire to create David, even superseding Edwin's flat-out refusal to make a David robot. There's clearly more to this character than just being a scripted AI. Even the deceptive way that F10 tricks Arnold, this isn't just programming, this character is learning, it's watching, it's plotting. I apologize if I sound like a broken record here, but I truly can't ignore these things, and I'm hoping that I can at least partially convey why I think this is so important. But this is supposed to be about Princess Quest, so let's continue. I suppose before I get too far, I should explain what first clicked in my mind that even made me come to this conclusion that the princess is Fiona. So remember in Secret of the Mimic how Fiona talks about going to Fallfest? Specifically, she says,
Ed, I hope this message reaches you as soon as you get a break. I have to go help the Fallfest crew, just for a few days until the installation is finished. It's hard to explain. I just have this terrible feeling like I need to be there so nothing goes wrong. Just in case. Trisha will babysit David while I'm gone. I love you both, and I'll be back next week.
I want to put some serious emphasis on her terrible feeling that she gets here. I think it's highly significant that Fiona can't explain this terrible feeling she has about Fallfest. What prompts this strange motivation? That in itself could be a whole host of videos, so I just want to focus on this particular terrible feeling for a minute. And my insistence on focusing on this is simply because the princess says some similar things in Princess Quest. In Princess Quest 1, as she's gathering her hearts and whatnot, she asks herself, what is this feeling? And after collecting another, she says, I feel strange. But the specific instance I want to talk about is when she finds the Vanny mask and the green rabbit plush in Princess Quest 3. She says specifically, something is not right. This line is what originally got me thinking about Fiona being the princess. That whole idea stemmed from this. It just sounds an awful lot like what Fiona says before she goes to Fallfest. Now I know that it isn't word for word what Fiona says in Secret of the Mimic, which is an important distinction to make, but I just can't help but notice the similarities here. If that seems a bit far-fetched for you though, I do also want to talk about the location where we find the Vanny mask. Specifically, this is the corn maze from Help Wanted, a Fallfest location. Fallfest, the place that gave Fiona this terrible feeling to start with. As for the area where the green rabbit plush is found, originally I was going to point out that the pillars here slightly resemble the pillars in the tiger basement of Secret of the Mimic, and the conveyor belts reminded me of the Molten Dolly chase scene, but I felt like that was an enormous stretch as the actual locations don't actually look very similar. But what I do think is worth pointing out is that Chica is here watching us, and while this could be a reference to Ultimate Custom Night, where Chica says, I am the first, I have seen everything, it could also be a reference to Fiona in the way that she helped create the original Chica, the chicken designs and whatnot. We have a few more connections I'd like to make about this princess. So let's talk about those. There's another very important aspect about Fallfest that ties directly to Princess Quest though. Remember this terrifying scream that happens when the princess completes Princess Quest 3? For whatever reason, I always assumed this was the defeat of Glitchtrap, but we hear this scream again in Help Wanted 2 after Springtrap appears to fight us in this minigame. A minigame that we only unlock after setting fire to the Fallfest location in the previous minigames. We're literally standing in the crumbling, destroyed remains of Fallfest when this William Afton character appears to fight us. Since we are fairly confident that Fiona dies at Fallfest, due to her comments that she makes before she dies, and due to Edwin's comments about how she wasn't even supposed to be there, as well as some of the hints in Moon.exe bringing up a fire at Fallfest, could this actually be Fiona's scream? I always wondered why the scream sounded the way it does if we just completed the game successfully. Like, that isn't a scream of joy, but of great anguish. I can't help but wonder now if this has always been a foreshadowing of the big reveal that is Fiona's death at Fallfest. And if that's the case, then this would pretty much confirm that William Afton had a hand in Fiona's death, which is why he shows up in Princess Quest at all. If the princess represents Fiona and Afton is connected to Fiona's demise, of course he's going to show up both at Fallfest and in Princess Quest. But with that crazy knowledge in mind, I want to switch gears a little bit and just start listing some more things I've connected. Princess Quest 2, for example, begins with an old man greeting us, telling us, "You are alive, that is good. Take the sword of light and go." I'm not going to focus too much on the old man today, but I do want to talk about this sword itself very briefly. Fiona is heavily associated with the sun character in FNAF, specifically from the Moon.exe game, and the sun is associated with light, so I assume the sword that we use in this minigame is yet another way that FNAF is trying to tell us, hey, this character is Fiona. This princess can wield a sword of light, and that makes a lot of sense if the princess is in fact Fiona. Anyway, that's all I want to say about the sword. A few other weaker pieces of evidence I'd like to bring up quickly are that in Secret of the Mimic, one of the Murray's sales attractions we find around the manor is this whole theme centering around a medieval time period, complete with knights and castles, which we even find in David's room, which to me blends perfectly into the Princess Quest video game theme. The Princess Quest scenery takes place mostly in castles, caves, etc., and you're playing as a princess, wandering and finding your way through it all. So there is a bit of thematic storytelling that I think lends nicely to the idea of the princess being Fiona, but that doesn't stand super strongly as evidence on its own either. What I think does stand really strongly on its own, however, is the way that Princess Quest as a whole is used in the actual Five Nights at Freddy's story. This is what makes it a lot more compelling to me. By that, I mean how the characters in the world of Five Nights at Freddy's actually engage with the Princess Quest game. Besides Gregory, we were introduced through duffel bag messages scattered around the Pizzaplex to a character who had been obsessively playing the Princess Quest games before Gregory. It's this character I now want to talk about. So if the princess is Fiona, there's bound to be Edwin. The pair was portrayed in Secret of the Mimic as absolute lovebirds. They treasured each other, trusted each other, but unfortunately, as is the case in FNAF so often, Edwin loses his wife. But we know, since this is FNAF, nobody is ever fully gone. How does Edwin tie into Princess Quest exactly? And this is where the story for me gets a little more compelling. Security Breach gives us a valuable look into what Edwin was doing during this Princess Quest time in Security Breach. So this player that's so obsessed with Princess Quest is so incredibly obsessed that they literally get fired over this, according to the duffel bag message, which says exit interview. I believe this person is Edwin. And let's take a look at these messages through that lens. There are a few moments from these messages we need to go over. First, the speaker mentions how when they try to play Princess Quest 2, they get immensely invested, going so far as to say, "Shuts down when I try to play?" Like it's personal. Why would a random Fazbear employee take this personally at all? Unless this actually is personal, because this is about Fiona and Edwin. Think back to after Fiona's death, and later after Edwin gets super angry at F10, and Edwin stops communicating with her.
It is lonely down here. My communications with Edwin have been severed. Edwin abandoned us. He shut himself away in our home.
F10 believes that Edwin abandoned her. This would likely lead to a distrust of Edwin. She still loves him, but he's got to win her back now. It's been decades without him. So she believes that Edwin abandoned his family, and so if Edwin is the one talking in these messages about the princess, this Princess Quest back and forth truly is personal, and there's legit reason for him to take this game very seriously. Edwin is trying to win his wife back over, and he realizes that he's got to step up to the plate, get her trust, and save her. His last message about this says, "They are working together, the arcades, they are hiding something, the glitches. Glitch them all at the same time, then the princess will recognize me. She's testing me. I am not yet worthy. The others are protecting it. Let me stay. I am so close. Just one more night, please. I can save the princess." Why would anyone be so obsessed with saving this princess? Unless, of course, this is a husband trying to save his beloved wife. Or should I say, a prince trying to save his princess. And what does this person mean when they talk about the princess recognizing them? Testing me, as they say. And here's my quick answer in a nutshell. If the princess is connected to Fiona and F10, I find this whole idea is very consistent with F10's past actions. See, in Secret of the Mimic, F10 is only pleased with Arnold when he finally does what F10 has asked of him in the secret ending. She says the following when Arnold completes Moon.exe: "You have found my presence. You have completed my tasks." And even before this, as Arnold is on his way to the research and development area, F10 is scolding him, saying things like,
"No, you did everything I asked up to this point. You were an obedient dog, a good dog. You should have done what you were told. Fazbear will send another. Maybe that one will help me."
All of these lines insinuate that Fiona/F10 is giving tasks to the varying users they come across, testing them to see if they're actually there to help her. I can go more into all that in another video, but to stay on the point here, in the same way as these examples show us, Edwin is quite literally being tested by the princess to see if he's worthy. Will he be able to beat the game? Let's test him, see if he's really up to the task. But maybe I'm drawing the wrong conclusions here. Regardless, we have another problem that I've run into. We know that this person, whoever played these arcade games, did not succeed in saving the princess. The games are still unfinished by the time Gregory is introduced in Security Breach. So to explain this, essentially what happened is, just like in the books how Edwin was unable to complete his goals, in the game timeline he is also unable to save the princess in time, and that's why the games are still here with Gregory. Before I switch away from Edwin though, I do want to briefly touch on something else concerning him. Some of you might be thinking I need to back up here because a lot of people think Edwin died in Secret of the Mimic. And while I respect that perspective, I strongly disagree. And I disagree for a few reasons. First of all, while the books are a bit different from the game, the story beats are still quite consistent. The timeline of events changes, such as when Fiona dies or what the location looks like, but the ideas carry over seamlessly in both book and game. David dies, Fiona dies, Mimic is killing employees, Edwin vanishes. I am working on another video to showcase how closely these two stories actually do align. But one other reason I believe Edwin is alive is because in Dawko's Steel Wool interview before the Secret of the Mimic game came out, he was told that both the books and the game's stories were being written around the same time. And if that's the case, it doesn't really make sense to give Edwin a whole separate story in the Pizzaplex in the books, only to kill him off in Secret of the Mimic before the events of the Pizzaplex. So having these logs that we can find by the time Security Breach rolls around is a really neat way to show what Edwin was doing during this time. So for me, I personally think that Edwin was absolutely at the Pizzaplex for a time. He might have died before the events of Security Breach, but at this point, I fully think he's the one who was playing Princess Quest in some fashion or other. So regardless, in order for this theory to work at all, Edwin does have to be around in some manner, and if you disagree, that's perfectly valid. While we're on the topic of disagreement, I do want to offer a bit more of where I'm coming from with my perspective that Fiona is possessing F10, at least somewhat. Essentially, how I see it playing out is that Fiona's soul possesses F10 simultaneously with the actual AI program. For lack of a better word, I believe that these two minds, Fiona and F10, are both active. Whether they've merged into one being or they're separate characters altogether, I don't know. I think the best explanation of the type of connection that Fiona and F10 have is neatly shown to us visually in Princess Quest 2 and 3. During certain segments of the arcade game, the princess has to work with a shadowy version of herself. While this could just be a game mechanic, I see this as visual imagery of the two entities both inhabiting the same space. Fiona and F10 merged together, forced to coexist with one another. The soul and the AI, an amalgamation of sorts. And let's not forget how Scott Cawthon is deeply intrigued by this concept. So all that to say, that's some of why I think Fiona is somehow, someway possessing this AI that is F10. I can't answer yet if they're the same being, but my best offering is just this visualization that we see in Princess Quest. But I don't want to dwell on it too much at this point because we don't really know the ins and outs of how this possession even works, let alone specifically how she was able to contact Edwin and so forth if she died at Fallfest. And again, it's just where I'm at with the lore. There are plenty of counter arguments that are very well supported too. One other thing I know people are going to bring up is that in Security Breach, the file name for the princess was originally Cassidy, but it was later quickly changed to Princess. I did a bit of digging online as well, and from what I found, correct me if you found additional info, but from what I found, the name Cassidy was never present in the mobile port of Princess Quest's files, which further leads me to believe that the name Cassidy being present at all was truly a misunderstanding on Steel Wool's part, and that it was one of the various ways that Scott and Steel Wool miscommunicated and why it was promptly deleted without any comment or further ado. If this character was always supposed to be somebody else, it makes sense then why the name was deleted. It wasn't to cover up information so that we can't can't solve anything. It was part of course correcting the damage that such a misleading reveal would have when people are trying to solve FNAF lore. And since at the time we had absolutely no idea about Fiona or the Murrays, it was in Scott's best interest not to say anything and let us discover this for ourselves when the time was right. But so now that we're here, what does any of this matter? Well, let's try to recap in a sense. So first, the princess introduced to us in Help Wanted is Fiona. And if that's true, I think it's fair to say that Edwin is likely the one playing the Princess Quest games in the messages from these duffel bags that we find around the Pizzaplex. He ultimately fails at saving her though. Before the princess can be freed, there's very likely glitchtrap influence corrupting the game's outcome, and this corruption may even be causing the princess to be stuck in a loop during the events of Security Breach. And how sadly fitting that is when we remember that the song that plays during the Princess Quest games is titled Caught in a Loop. The first 3 Princess Quests also seem to give glitchtrap some control over victims, which is why Vanessa is freed when Princess Quests 1 through 3 are beaten. Once Gregory beats the games in Security Breach, glitchtrap is now without a host, but since he's still alive, it's Help Wanted 2 where he's finally stopped. A lot of people believe that the princess represents Vanessa, but if that is true, there shouldn't be a Princess Quest 4 as Vanessa was freed after Security Breach, and yet the princess remains, which to me implies this was never Vanessa. Rather, Vanessa, like Gregory, is a victim of this glitchtrap virus that the princess is fighting. There are a lot more conclusions to be made here, but this script is already larger than I wanted it to be, so hopefully we can release what's essentially a part 2 of this in the coming days. But what do you think? Have I absolutely lost the plot? If I have, I'm currently okay with that because I'm really enjoying this fresh perspective on the story. If the princess is Fiona or F10 separate of Fiona, we have some really interesting lore directions the story could be going next. If the princess is Fiona, what is her goal? If the princess is F10 and not Fiona, are they an evil mastermind? What will they be like now that Glitchtrap is destroyed? Lastly, it's really difficult to put everything I want to say into a video, so if there's anything you're confused by and want clarification on, I'd be happy to discuss further in the comments. Thank you for watching, and hopefully talk to you in the comments.